want to introduce Willy Lim. He's the Global Advisory and Solutions Lead for Digital Currencies, Payments, and Markets at R3 in Singapore. He has a broad perspective on the payment sector, in particular in Asia and Australia. So we welcome his insights on the topic of payment platforms. Willy, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Paula. And it's a great opportunity to be here today in the Mojaloop conference. And I'm really excited. Personally, I'm really passionate, especially with Mojaloop's vision around like financial inclusion. Yeah. So just to give a sort of like an agenda for today, I'll be focusing a lot on the instant payment landscape. This is a landscape that is quite really a very dynamic and evolving here, particularly here in the Asia Pacific, all the way from as far as probably from India all the way to Australia. Now I'll set aside as well around the various industry trends, the current models. These are the models as to how the current ecosystem has been created, and also things around the gaps and challenges, especially as to where Mojaloop as a community will be able to come in. And also, I also set aside and really pointed out the case for open source. I've been in the industry for the last 20 plus years, and definitely the community, the whole ecosystem really needs to have like a strategy around open source, primarily because it is to promote a social utility ecosystem. And at the same time, I'll share as well what's coming. So these are some of the landscape, some of the innovation that's coming out. And definitely, all I can say personally, Asia in particular is really the cornerstone when it comes to innovation in the payment landscape. Just to set the scene around the industry trends, so these are some of the things that I collected all around from the industry. Some of them are not probably new, but it's something that I pointed out because there's an underlying impact to the whole ecosystem. So definitely one thing that's really calls out is around the rise of embedded finance. This is really what is particularly old is now new again. So things around like we started to see like payments handling the non-traditional way, things around like you don't need to have like a bank account, things around as well embedding finance to like traditionally not financial services companies, where you can start to see cross-selling, like for example, telecoms will be able to provide payments, things around like ride-sharing application that is plethora across all Asia Pacific and worldwide. They're now entering into the ecosystem where they facilitate digital financial services. And the key thing about that is around payment. We also see around the rise of real-time digital payments. So real-time digital payments is really not just a digitization of payment, but it's really at the same time, it promotes liquidity. Now, liquidity is a massive thing, especially in the consumer side of Asia Pacific, especially where a lot of the middle class need that excess cash predominantly to operate, to have a recurring revenue, of course, to have a recurring income to support the family. At the same time as well, it's predominantly important, especially where I came from the Philippines, where expat remittance is really quite a very important thing, and it's contributed to a significant factor to the whole economy. Things around as well, we started to see like as more domestic, faster, I would say like instant payment system tend to evolve, such as like in India, Singapore, Australia, where it's now becoming like quite easy to be able to facilitate instant payment by using various channels. And most of the recent years is really around the interoperability among all of these faster payment systems. In fact, it looks easy to see it from the paper, but in fact, it took some of this infrastructure years. Some of them took decades just to have this enabled, and it's still like still like an ongoing marathon. The other things as well to watch out is really the rise of electronic wallets. And again, QR payments. This is really to address the digital literacy, which is still, despite the advancement of digital payments all across Asia Pacific, there's still a certain significant gaps around like supporting digital literacy. Now, we also see around the plethora of open transfer platform. This is really the convergence of like, such as like in the UK, we have the open banking. In Asia Pacific, we're also seeing that convergence. Things around like it's shifting from us opening an account with a financial services. It is us as a household user or like a small medium enterprise to own our own sensitive data, and we'll be able to share it across the whole ecosystem to be able to facilitate crucial use cases such as like payments. Now, to understand deeply around instant payment, let's probably focus a lot on the key value chain. Now, and again, this is not a very exhaustive list. This could involve other indirect stakeholders. Now, at the very heart of all of this at the moment is really around the payment service operator, who in fact, payment service operator facilitates what we call like the orchestration of the whole industry. So PSOs, such as like, you can see like in India, it is played a significant factor, such as like the UPI, which is really the gold standard that's being followed through by a lot of the ecosystem all around the world. On the other side, you also have the public sector, such as like the central banks. It's really around their thinking is really around to make sure the monetary policies are really quite intact. This is definitely quite relevant, especially with the COVID-19 over the last couple of years, where the government are starting to send to support the economy by sending welfare money directly to the household to prop up the economy. And this has become like a challenge, especially as the instant payment ecosystem are handled mostly by the private sector. And naturally, there's also like quite a significant barrier and financial exclusion. Now, things as well around the rise of the new access. Gone are the days where we mention when we measure payment system is really around the traditional banks who are handling it. But over the last year or so, this is again probably like a common knowledge among the community is really around the rise of more access, really lowering down the barriers. We're starting to see like regional banks or MFI, microfinancial institution or payment service provider to enter the arena, really to support the gaps that the banks could no longer, I would say like support. So these are like really financial targeting, solving financial inclusion or unbanked or underbanked, which traditionally the banks are now not necessarily are going in there primarily because of cost barrier. We also started to see some really innovative, impactful use cases, such as like the merchant side, really around like the handling of acquire and POS. Things like this is really understanding as well, like what will be the relevant technology interface that is really supporting to make the cost lower, especially to promote small, medium enterprise. Now, all of this value chain, we need to consider about each of their thinkings, each of their like objectives, especially from around central bank and other regulators, is really around policy, governance, and compliance. Compliance things around like supporting financial crime compliance, making sure that illicit activities are, I would say, mitigated in the ecosystem. Things around as well like public policies, making sure that who are the key gateways for the payment scheme are quite fairer to the whole ecosystem. We also started to see like the public. Definitely the public is really around cost, trust, and simplicity. And this is really quite a common trait, especially when we have as more of the underbanked who are predominantly lives in a cash society are shifting towards like a digital money payment, such as like the electronic money, as Costas mentioned earlier. It's really the demand coming out from the public is really to have that simplicity, digital simplicity. The other things as well is around from the financial services provider, PSPs, around the horizontal and vertical integration. Although the horizontal side has always been predominantly taken care by the payment service operator, while at the same time, vertical integration, this is like integrating to their own core banking system or to their other businesses or their applications, tends to also become like a major hurdle as well. That's why they also goes around like a simplicity and also like a standardization. To really all in effect, it will also lower down the cost. It promotes the whole societal benefit to the ecosystem. Now let's took into an example of a traditional model for the value chain. This is again like a classic domestic instant payment, faster payment that's been operating all around the world. There's a little bit of a slightly flavor, especially coming out from the emerging countries such as like Africa, Asia, South Asia. It's really around like the natural extension of electronic money. This is really, you started to see like a non-traditional financial service provider. It could be like a telco operating electronic money. It's really, their objective is really to close the gap around financial inclusion targets. We also started to see like really the plethora of the last miles. This is really where all the innovation comes in from the private sector. It's really like payment, person-to-person payment, facilitated by mobile payment, things around like QR payment. These are like operated by national QR payment system, as well as like the payment switch. And underneath that, we still have the traditional wholesale payment system, which is really predominantly is the function is really around settlement, clearing, and standardization. Now, the key thing about the traditional model, it does really work. Like I will probably say, like, for example, I'm a heavy user of instant payment. I do get credited right away. However, there are some still significant problems, which I would say probably contributed to financial inclusion. It's also contributed to around like distrust, and also contributed around like scalability and I would say like barrier issue. Now, before I continue, I would like to invite the community to please post your question or your comments in the chat channel. I would like to make this one as an open conversation as much as possible, because to me, it is like a full learning between me and also from the community as well. Now, I'll part aside around the details around the however, let me continue first around the trends when it comes to RTPS or the real-time payment system infrastructures. There's still a lot of things around like localization versus off-the-shelf proven discussion. We started to see there are several like infrastructure operators tend to build on their own, really to have the full control of the product roadmap. There's some jurisdiction who decide to go with the off-the-shelf, make to effectively their motivation is really to implement what is available out there. As I mentioned earlier, at the end of the day, the key thing here is around making sure the trust is there in the infrastructure, because that is really the cornerstone for the community to be able to use the payment infrastructure. Things around PCOs, the total cost ownership, and the resourcing availability. This is quite a very important consideration, especially when you have instant payment where the marginal cost is going down. The tendency is really like it's supposed to be, it will lower down the cost for the whole community, and it will promote, I would say, more access, more players, and more competitiveness. Things around agility, resilience. When you talk about instant payment, it's all about throughput. It's all about like the speed of how it's being settled. At the same time as well, things around a crucial topic around security and scalability. Now, all of these are quite a trend. It's nothing new, but it's becoming really apparent, especially as the ecosystem tend to grow, to evolve, as more players come into the picture, as more channels are being developed by the community or the banks, are more services being introduced, and more payment scheme introduced by either the policymakers or even the whole community to make sure the fairness and the trustworthiness of the system. Now, these are some of the juicy parts. Despite under the hood, instant payment works pretty well. However, there's still some gaps and challenges. Really, these are the gaps and challenges that will magnify, especially as we see the growth of electronic commerce are growing, especially in Asia Pacific or even worldwide, as we also start to see as well, like the more, I would say, like the growth around like the challenge around for the less usage of cash, especially with COVID-19, and you started to see like it's more shifting towards electronic payments. So things around the gaps is proprietary, and again, this is no brainer. Having a proprietary application, which is quite common among the payment service operator infrastructure, even the last mile, is really a headache. As one of the most evident one, as you can see earlier, we've seen a lot of like interoperability among various faster payment system. We've seen around like developing various channels, but all of those took actually years for them to be able to build, and some of them are actually still having scalability, standardization issue, things around like APIs that have talked to the other APIs. You have to map things like this, which create more risks and also create more headache and create more, I would say, increasing costs for the ecosystem. Things around as well, the prevalence of closed loop payment systems. So these are really, as Costa mentioned earlier, actually this is quite prevalent, especially as the rise of electronic monies. These are now like most of the subscribers to electronic money tends to stay into their own ecosystem. Now, this is just again like this is again could cause like financial exclusion, cause a higher barrier, and at the same time as well, like it could be also like costly for policymakers. Now, the other thing as well, which is really quite common, despite the advancement of simplicity around channels, faster payment, the digital financial literacy is still a challenge. In fact, like I've seen one of the reports coming out from NPCI in India, like it's only that was as of 2019, it's only 35% of the whole population who actually have used digital payments. So that's really quite a glaring effect. You can start to see that a significant portion of the ecosystem still use physical cash for day-to-day businesses. The other thing as well is trust. Now, trust, I would say it depends on certain jurisdiction. It's really how the infrastructure is being operated. There's some like, despite advancement, despite us being promoted by the public sector, such as like a payment infrastructure, trust remains a problem. In fact, like in one of my recent analysis, when I delivered a payment strategy for the Kingdom of Bhutan, despite the ecosystem, the faster payment has been developed by the central bank, which is a trusted entity. Trust remains a significant barriers for the community, for the household to use the system, primarily because they felt it's new, they felt it's too difficult to use, they felt that what will happen if something goes wrong, where in fact with cash to them is quite very simple. Now, the other thing as well, as I mentioned several times, is really around the cross-border interoperability. This remains a marathon. Like as I explained earlier, like as more, despite our economies tend to become more integrated, payments, interoperability payments remains, I would say, like a holy grail. Like in fact, like it's still a prevalent problem where cross-border payments, despite there's some closed-loop payment system who will be able to do like cross-border really quickly, real time. But however, the underneath wholesale settlement side, the corresponding bank network remains a very difficult task, which creates a headache around standardization, interoperability. And last but not the least is really around security concerns. We've seen a lot of cybersecurity attack. In fact, like the regulators nowadays are really quite focusing a lot around cybersecurity, making sure the infrastructure is really not just only support around like standard security procedures or scheme. It also promotes like privacy, things like this, which is really quite common. Now, these are just some of the highlights. Before we move on, this becomes, with the challenge that I said earlier, this becomes like a very important topic discussion around things around like what are the emerging payment trends that are coming out nowadays. We talk about wallets. Wallets is becoming a predominant feature all around when it comes to faster payment. And in fact, like its application is now humongously growing, not just only from a storage of a payment instrument, but also it could become like tokens for as like a holder for non-fungible tokens, things like that. So wallet becomes really like a significant factor that needs to be supported, and wallet is heavily dependent on the standardization layer. We've seen around as well like new players coming into the ecosystem. Now, the players are really quite significant because, like, this is something I'm personally quite happy because a lot of the policymakers nowadays are really promoting more access, really to more participation. It's really for the view not only lowering down the cost, but it's also promoting a competitive landscape. At the same time as well, things around like promoting like a platform where the barriers are much more lower, which really at the end of the day, payments is a social utility. The other thing as well is around the emerging payment trends is around acquiring. This is really the merchants use cases, the mobile POS. This is again really gone are the days like you have really attached to the bank account. This is really around, we started to see like things around like merchants and be able to integrate their businesses into electronic. At the same time, it's also lowering down the cost, especially for small, medium enterprise, I would say like merchants. The other things around is really carefully look into like fraud mitigation. This is really not just only for compliance perspective, but it's really making sure like it's really to mitigate any illicit activities such as like, you know, like illegal activities or things around using payment to overcome some of the like some of the like illegal tasks such as like probably tax evasion, things like that. Definitely fraud mitigation is also a common theme. Now, other things as well, which I'll be discussing a little bit, is around the rise of digital currency. We also seen around QR payments. QR payments is really quite a significant push, especially with as we now use it heavily for contact tracing for QR, for you know like for COVID-19. QR payments is also playing a significant factor because it addressed digital literacy per se. Now, the other thing spectrum as well, which is more from a policy side, is really around the growth of cashless society. Now, cashless society is really a very unique, intriguing phenomenon because, like, it's at the same time it promotes like a more participation to a digital economy. It's breaking down the barriers. At the same time, it's also creating like potentially like a barrier for policymakers to be able to develop and deliver their policies as well. Now, things are as well a lot of around cross-border, as I mentioned earlier, is not about adapting the current corresponding bank model, but it's really collapsing that model, allowing new participants, it's like money service bureau, which is quite common in the Middle East, be able to take on remittance and be able to deliver it in real time to like in collaboration with a financial service provider, such as like in a country like a big remittances like Philippines, Indonesia, or India, things like this. Now, at the heart of all of this is really I've seen personally, I'm passionate about this, is really the growth of open finance. And if we recalibrate this one properly, I would say we have one in a generational opportunity to be able to create a true inclusive open finance system. This is really where financial inclusion targets are met. This is really where things around like digital literacy are addressed. You have risk really lowering down, counterparty risk, which promotes lowering down the cost. At the same time as well, it's really making things much more easier and much more simpler. And at the same time as well, promoting new businesses, new fintechs to establish new businesses. This is something that I actually challenged the Mojaloop community because like it's really we've seen now like a new plethora of new businesses such as like peer-to-peer small medium enterprise lending, things around like households who have excess cash will be able to lend out to like, for example, like to be able to do micropayments to like for like communities to be able to deliver the businesses to be able to the basic services that they need. So these are all emerging payment trends that we heavily need to consider before we effectively before we move on to the new system. Now, I would like to take a closer look around digital currency. I understand that CBDC have been presented to the Mojaloop community as a generic discussion. I would like to tailor this one mostly on why this is quite crucial, especially for the open source community, in particular to Mojaloop. Now, to set our alignment and state, CBDC or central bank digital currency is a legal tender, which is like digitization of a physical cash, which is with the direct liability to the central bank. So it's similar to how the physical cash is and how what is the current gap? Why this is becoming popular? Because nowadays, whatever digital payment system we have, there is no such thing that it is linked directly to the legal tender, like as if like it's being issued by the central bank. That has a very significant implication because, like, if you look into it now in our ecosystem, it's all predominant by the private sector. If the private sector, for example, like an MFI or a banks, have filed bankruptcy, effectively you cannot claim everything what you have. Now with CBDC, that's a little bit of a game changer because for the fact that that is the cash or the instrument that you carry out is directly being issued by a trusted legal public sector, such as like the central bank. Now, one thing I want to make it very clear: CBDC is not a payment. CBDC is an instrument. So in other words, CBDC, for it to be able to work, it needs a payment infrastructure ecosystem. Hence, like, this is where a Mojaloop as the settlement instruction side really plays a significant factor, especially as more central banks start to roll this one out. Now, the other implication, as I mentioned earlier, around CBDC, the central banks are also starting to change the discussion around taking a closer look to how the intermediation financial system we have. We have traditionally the central bank, and we have the financial service provider as sort of like as the distributor for, I would say, like us to distributor of where the household or the businesses open their account. Now, one important thing is really the central bank are really looking into like an account versus token model. Now, token is similar to akin to our physical cash, where it promotes anonymity. So that significant implication of anonymity, it really promotes financial inclusion. Because imagine you don't really need to open a bank account similar to cash to be able to use a CBDC and a digital ecosystem. Now, another implication where a lot of the central banks are really looking to is like the hybrid CBDC model. Now, the hybrid CBDC model, as I mentioned earlier, is now segregating the payment instrument as a CBDC from the liability of a private sector, such as like a commercial bank or a payment service provider, to the liability of the central bank. So per se, what implication does it have is, take it to example, like if the payment service provider closed shop, effectively, my CBDC sitting into my wallet, although it's under the custody of the payment service provider, it's insulated from bankruptcy. In effect, like I could just easily move it one for one, like for like, the same value to another distributor or another PSP. That also gives the central bank sort of like a policy tool, especially if in the case of like there's a significant bank run in the society or something where some of the banks are having a distress, and for the central bank to be able to move across the CBDC holded by household to another like wallet service provider or another financial provider without having to allow the household to sacrifice for bankruptcy. In effect, it is insulating the risk of the financial service provider from the risk of the central bank per se. Now, the other implication of the hybrid CBDC is really the competitive landscape. You started to see fintechs are now coming to the picture. You also started to see around like new players such as like non-financial services, or like what I mentioned, embedded finance, could become a distributor of CBDC. Now, this is a classic example where faster payment, the current state on the left side, differs when retail CBDC or a general purpose CBDC becomes really into a mainstream. Now, I separated wholesale CBDC because wholesale CBDC is traditionally it's just only for interbank settlement. Retail CBDC has been arguably been agreed all upon by the community. It is more impactful because it may address significant societal problems such as like financial inclusion. Now, on the left side, as I mentioned earlier, like we started to see like faster payment does work. So what's the problem? The problem, in fact, is more around on the back end side. So every time, for example, when I do a payment in my mobile phone, for example, and when I decided to do a person-to-person payment, The payee will be able to get credited right away. However, the problem with that one is you don't get instant settlement or settlement finality. What you get is a credit. It's a credit where the wholesale settlement, the settlement still happen at the wholesale in the back end. That usually there's a lag time. It could be like several hours later. In some cases, it could take several days. Now, in effect, what's significant as it happened in a household is, number one, that translates to a cost. That's why you started to see, like, in faster payment, there's a limit caps in certain jurisdiction. There's also some, like, merchant, I would say, like, percentage cost because of the loan, what we call the collateralization of the loan before to credit, so that the household or whatever, the merchant will be able to credit right away. So things like this takes a significant instruction, whereas in the retail CBDC side, it's very simple. When a merchant MPOS, when a user, me, when I tap into the MPOS of a merchant, I facilitate instant settlement right away. It's really, we started to see the internet of value. Now this is where, as I mentioned earlier, CBDC is just only a payment instrument. The payment settlement instruction side still needs to happen, and that is something that the community needs to be able to build, to be able for the CBDC to be able to create a more simplistic and more standardized form. Now, for an organization I came from R3, we are not new when it comes to collaboration for open source. In fact, like Corda itself have been developed in collaboration with the community, not only from R3, but also like in cross collaboration with other chains. In fact, like I would like to cite this example where like we created, we as a community, together with the policy, this is quite a bit unique. A year ago, together with the public sector, the central banks, we decided to create a CBDC working group community where we work together with the payment service operator, the fintechs, the wallet service provider, and also other regulators, and also all the rest of the whole community to be able to accelerate and develop like a next generation payment ecosystem, but mostly driven from CBDC as a payment instrument. What we've done here effectively is we together with this community were able to create standardization around like token, SDK, this is like software development kit, wallet SDKs for the community to be able to develop application on top of that. We also look into like the integration layer more around like the vertical side, especially if it needs to hook up to the core banking system. We also promote around horizontal standardization. Now and again, this collaboration have a bit of a lot of like deliverables. We started to see now in the community, you can start to see as a community things around like the delivery of a CBDC sandbox, which is really the vision of that one. It allows a lot of the emerging countries central bank to be able to accelerate their understanding of the application of CBDC and to work in collaboration with the community and to develop applications, not just only addressing instant payment, but at the same time as well to develop like tools that need to be participate as well. We also develop gateways as well. These gateways also works. In fact, some of our peers in the community, such as from other blockchain, other traditional rail, were able to actually promote as well to the creation of the standardization of gateway. Now, things that we are currently working on as a community is around the application of a dynamic MPOS, dynamic QR code. This is something that has been raised by a lot of the regulator because like the static QR and QRC code at the moment is maybe subjected to security risk. So this is something that one of the community have developed this dynamic, and it's now actually in the open source. Is something I would like to invite the community. Now this I would say open source community is actually still quite small. In fact, I actually send this invitation to the whole Mojaloop community to will let us work in collaboration because there are some other gaps that which I believe the Mojaloop community will be able to close that gap. Now, some of the learning from our having to have this ecosystem with open source is really the key benefit. It's really around a collaborative industry design. Now, this collaboration is really quite powerful because as as number one, like it takes a village, it takes a full industry to be able to solve, to deliver a more appropriate design. Things around as well to facilitate standardization. Now, standardization, it could be tactical, it could be payment scheme. It's something that is quite, it's quite something that we sort of like give and take in the past era. Now with an open source, we were able to accelerate that one in a much more faster way. We also, the key benefits around is an accelerator. As Paula mentioned earlier, it's really promote lowering down the cost because you have like ready-made features where the community can just adapt and improve it a bit and be able to promote it back to the community. It also promotes around inclusiveness. Now, this is something that I'm personally quite happy because like a lot of the, for example, the features, like even in Mojaloop, even like in our community as well, it really promotes around like digital literacy, simplicity of use is really adapting to how cash is being used nowadays. We also see around the technical strength. And again, like it will be difficult for one industry tech player to develop a perfect design, especially as the world is becoming more interconnected. Now, there's some as well concerns, especially around like, it's still an elephant in the room around security standardization. And again, like this is like a constant debate, like, should security be an open source or a closed source now, or a proprietary? Now, this is something that it's still an ongoing topic. I'm hoping it will be an open source, but at the same time, how can we manage this balancing this different thoughts? Things around as well, the supportability. Now, support SLA. There's always misconception out there when you talk about open source that there's a lack of support from making sure that throughputs are met, things like that. This is something like, of course, like as a community, we'll need to be able to educate the ecosystem. Now, things around trust as well. Say something like the design, the feature, we should be promote trust. And also around like schemes around like incentivize. How do we incentivize the ecosystem to be able to promote their code and to work with the collaboration? Things around as well competition. Now again, like for open source, it's really around like I could see a lot of tech participant collaboration work together, or even like businesses in competition work together, because at the end of the day there are significant problems such as like AML, compliance, money law, transaction screening, which is all compliance, which is really a common utility problem all across the ecosystem. And in fact, like this is one of those strong areas where competition work. The other thing as well is around standardization. Now, personally, Mojaloop really plays a significant factor in here, especially with the strength of the community. It's really Mojaloop, as Paula suggested earlier, it's really promote around open collaboration. And again, this is what the industry from a payments, instant payment, whether it's CBDC driven or it could be like the instant payment community, really needs. Because at the end of the day, proprietary API layers, it's something that it's not scalable. It's something that will promote probably financial inclusion. Things around like passionately, the focus of Mojaloop is really financial inclusion. And again, I said it several times, I'm really quite passionate because to me, like as financial inclusion, it not necessarily mean like it's just connotate to income, a lack of income. It's connotate because like the current financial system is created by a credit ecosystem where a lot of the underbanked are not able to participate because they couldn't really be able to be onboarded, whether it's cost, whether because of the infrastructure being developed or being invested by the ecosystem really excluded that. And this is where I believe Mojaloop will play a significant factor. Now, the focus around critical features, I'm really quite excited. I myself have been quite a user of the Mojaloop. In fact, I developed various applications. I really like around the account lookup. This feature, coming out from the industry is quite really relevant, especially it simplifies around like onboarding account and be able for cross financial sector, financial service provider, MFI to work collaboration together. Now, Mojaloop again will play a significant factor from a technical standardization. It could be like a business standardization. Now, when I talk about business standardization, and this one is really around like the settlement instruction layer, especially, for example, like if retail CBDC becomes mainstream, adopted worldwide, a lot of the gaps nowadays is really standardization. And to me, the best ecosystem, the best community to develop that is Mojaloop. Especially because like you focus around like lowering down the barriers, simplicity, and it's really the model around like the APIs are being built, whether it's horizontal and vertical. I myself is really, really excited how this standardization will be able to evolve as we continue to grow the ecosystem. Now, I took the liberty of Mojaloop, and again, this is a challenge to the community of the Mojaloop. Take it to example like central bank digital currency. And again, in Asia Pacific side, this is really quite a topical topic. And in fact, a lot of the central banks are investing a lot of time in this one, especially in the retail CBDC. A lot of the payment service operator have understood that instant payment, as I mentioned earlier, have significant gaps, and that is really around the financial risk. With CBDC is really designed as a societal utility, meaning that it is designed for promoting financial inclusion. It promotes around like I would say like simplicity. It's really CBDC could be an engine for Mojaloop, for example, for the ecosystem as a potential as a payment instrument. I also started to see as well like the role of central bank or other MFI, or it could be like household or businesses who have access capital, whether it is CBDC or other collateral, where they could become like a liquidity provider into the ecosystem. Now, where it ties up, again, here from an ecosystem, from a Mojaloop, you can start to see like account lookup services where banks are be able to look up from a KYC perspective, the quoting side, especially like look into a use case where, as I mentioned earlier, which is close to my heart, where we have like migrant remittance use cases in certain corridors, such as like Philippines, India, where like coming out from more for advanced economies, or such as in the Middle East or in the US, where codes are being set about FX, and you have CBDC facilitate with the use of Mojaloop as a settlement instruction layer. Now, this is really quite powerful because it promotes instant settlement and facilitates facilitates like the risk mitigation, and I believe it will lower down the cost. Now, I know we have 3 more minutes to go. I'll just quickly, again, finishing up from my presentation. We as an open community, our open source ecosystem in the R3 side, we also do a lot of non-technology deliverables, things around like the Toolkit, which we have developed. It's really to help the community, the central banks, PSO, fintech, to understand the role of CBDC. Is there a business case for it? What would be the readiness, and how central banks, regulators be able to design an ecosystem while making sure key societal requirements such as financial inclusion are being met. Well, this is also extended to the private sector. All of this all come together. We're very quite excited because we all work. I personally working this one together with the World Economic Forum, where we extended the policy side into more implementation side. And we're able, this is one of the key things that helped me to develop a report for the Asian Development Bank to deliver several of the CBDC initiatives in all across across jurisdictions. Now, that's the end of my presentation for a while, and I'm really quite excited with a lot of the questions coming out here, and I do have 2 more minutes I can pick up. And yes, and again, I'll send out some of my answers into like into the chat channel. So I'm here from
Willy, Paula here. We are going to log the questions and send them to you, and we will send a note out to the whole community with your answers. I think you have really time for 1 question, and then we have to wrap.
No worries. Thank you, Paula. Yes. I'm really excited to be here. Yes. The first thing is your recent analysis from Leslie Ann said trust was a barrier for end household, too difficult to use. Can Mojaloop-centered protocol help advocate for the right user experience to build the trust and simplicity? Yes, definitely. I can say yes. Because, for example, like Mojaloop will be able to design, like, for example, like a channel where, for example, like a simplicity when you have like payments, person-to-person payment, you don't really have to exchange like complicated login. It could be like offline payments, for example. That's a classic example. Well, it makes it really like that will promote less trust barrier. Same thing as well, the application of more relevant payment instrument as well. I wish I could answer. I'm quite very excited with all of this question. I hope that I'll be able to answer all this and share it across to the community. And again, thank you so much, and I hope I shared a lot in the discussion today.